We are recording. Joining me today, Ian Winwood. Hello.
Hello, Stu. How are you? Hello to all your listeners.
No one's ever done that. That's nice.
Yeah, I don't know why it's a little affectation of mine. Now that I'm a media superstar, I find myself doing it. I find it's become a take. I don't know why.
Putting a bit back. It's nice. Uh, Before we get on with anything today, you mentioned just before we press record, and I was like, wait. I want to know how much you agonised over this, just because I know what you do for a living, and we'll obviously talk about that. I imagine we're on a very similar level of nerd when it comes to music, so I'm curious as to how agonising this was.
I'll go back right to first principles. Please forgive my ignorance, Stu, but I first became aware of your podcast, and I think it was a good episode to start with. And it was a woman called Kylie Olsen was your guest, who I'm sort of a little bit pally with on social media. I've only met her once, but it was brought to my attention that I warranted a mention. A book I've written warranted a mention. So obviously, being the narcissistic egomaniac that I am, I took myself out for a walk. It's a great day outside, but and it was only about a month ago, I think, and it was a beautiful day here in Camden. And I had a walk thinking, come on, when am I coming up? When am I coming up? So I learned a couple of things from this. And what you're learning is that I don't answer questions in a straight line. I learned that it's a very popular podcast and that the deficiency in my knowledge was my fault. And B, it's a really great template. It's a really great idea for a podcast. It's almost like a kind of a cool version of Desert Island Discs in a way.
Well, you're right, and that was. Do you know what? It's like what I was always obsessed with is high fidelity blew my mind,
right.
and the whole concept of lists in that was like, right, okay, so that's point one, and one of the people that I do a lot of sort of work with is a musician called Scroobius Pip from around my neck of the woods, and sorry, I shouldn't say musician, he's an actor, but one of the things that always I found really intriguing, because Pip's being from Essex like myself, was when people would go, so have you moved to London? And he's like, no. Why not? And he's like, well, why would I? And it's like, well, you want to be successful, you should move to London. And he was like, I don't really want to. Like, I'm quite happy where I am. And so it just made me a little bit intrigued as to people's location and where they're born and where they're brought up and how that impacts on a creative journey. Because if we look at music, and I'm sure this is something that you would have done countless times in your career. Like you've got London, Manchester, Liverpool. I guess every kind of area's got its big hitters. And I'm always intrigued as to like how much that draws the industry out to them places. Does anybody post early 1982 and coming out to watch Depeche Mode? Do people come out to my hometown anymore? Are people interested in what's going on in Southend on Sea? And so I wanted to sort of delve into them little pockets. And initially, this podcast was set up because I like nerdy questions and I like talking to people that are, create stuff. I thought I'd do each little mini series on a certain area. So my plan was the first one. If you see the first sort of 5 or 6 episodes, they're all in Essex.
Right.
And then basically people from further afield were like, oh, would you speak to blah, blah, blah? And it was like, oh my God, I'd love to speak to them. Oh, I've got to just, maybe I'll do a Birmingham one or whatever. And then all of a sudden it was like, I was just getting offered too many people that I really wanted to chat to that I was right, I've just got to. So that it kind of become a thing of its, its own little thing, sort of found its own way really. But essentially I just like being a bit nosy and talking to people about records.
It's great, and that's what I discovered when I was listening to it. I liked the interaction the two of you had, and hopefully that we will have. But in answer to your original question, Stu, I was starting to answer the questions that Kylie was answering.
Right.
and I think I said to you via email not to let light in behind the magic. That phrase isn't quite right, is it? But light in on the magic. But there's you have a category. What's the greatest intro? And as I was walking around Camden listening, I was thinking, do you know what? Whatever You Want by Status Quo. I don't know if you remember that. It's this really slow glide. And I thought that's a really good intro. Would I pick Quo? And it's the first song as well. Would I pick Quo? And for the longest time, I couldn't think of a better one. I have thought of a better one. So in answer to your question, I've been obsessing about it for about a month. You were kind enough to contact me and invite me on, but that's really neither here nor there. Even if we had never interacted and this wasn't happening right here, right now, I'd still be thinking about the questions and imagining myself to be on this podcast.
Because am I mad in saying that everybody has probably done their Desert Island Discs, right?
I certainly have. I certainly have. Well, I don't know if you remember. I mean, my wife listens obsessively with the Desert Island Discs. She's a bit more Radio 4 than I am. But I do remember when Danny Baker was on there, and he picked the first 10 songs he could remember hearing, and I quite liked that. But I think I'd probably pick my 10 favorite punk rock songs. I think that's what I'd probably do. I'm not expecting an invitation, I should say. But otherwise, I guess I'd start doing the thing, inevitably doing the thing about representation and about, I've got, I can't remember how many songs you're allowed. I've got 8 songs written by, performed by 40 blokes. And you start overthinking it a little bit.
Yeah.
I thought if I do my 8 favorite punk rock songs, then I can do it with an element of purity.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, look, we've touched on Quo. I know that you've parked that up. Dan's a fucking cracker, though, isn't it?
What's a cracker, Stu?
Dan by Status Quo.
Oh yeah.
What a tune!
Absolutely. I when I wore a younger man's clothes, Stu, I saw Queen and Quo on the same bill, and me and my mum at Wembley Stadium, and the undercard. I mean, it wasn't a co-headliner. Queen were the headliner, but it was, and on the undercard you had the Alarm and In Excess as well.
Oh, what a day out!
If you're 15, that's a banging day out. In fact, I've just briefly read. I was on a deadline yesterday. I don't know if you're filming this, but if you're not,
I am.
Right. I'll give her a little plug. I reviewed this book yesterday for the Times. Excuse the name drop. So I was on a monster of a deadline, and it's a book called Loud by a woman called Tana Douglas, and she never quite says this herself, but I reckon she is the first ever female roadie. With AC/DC in 1974, and then continues actually. But she was Quo's part of Quo's road crew. Roadies tend to refer to roadies and to themselves as techs these days because it's highly skilled work.
Yeah.
But roadie is the word that she uses, and they sound great. They sound great in it. They come out of it really, really well. So I've had them on my mind a little bit anyway, but Down's a fantastic song.
Okay, so what is the song with the greatest ever intro?
Well, the song with the greatest ever intro, Stu, I was thinking about this today. Let's put people out of their misery first of all. To my ears, the song with the greatest intro is a song by Green Day called "Panic Song."
Okay.
And I actually had a listen to it last night as I was exercising, and I listened to it a lot anyway. And it's from the 1995 album Insomniac, which was the successor to Dookie. Dookie, some of your listeners and you yourself may well know, was the album where Green Day went from selling, however, 10, 20,000 copies on a very small independent label to selling 20 million copies on Warner Brothers with Dookie. And Insomniac is if you listen to it in this light, which I do, is the sort of response to those kind of to having the bends really of overwhelming success. And Panic Song, it's only about 3.5 minutes long. I mean, the whole album is so pared back to the bone, and the intro itself, it just builds like a panic, like I imagine a panic attack would. And the intro is about 2 minutes long, and it just gets more and more ferocious as it goes on. And then after about 2 minutes, you've got a 90-minute song. I'm not quite sure the song itself quite worthy of the intro.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting because I was thinking about this just before I came on, that Green Day, who I don't like the last record, but I love them. I love them. And I've seen them 37 times, and I've been lucky enough to, sort of interviewed them certainly around America, and in Europe as well. But they're the first band that there is a brief window of opportunity where the bands that you listen to are exactly the same age as you are, within, say, a range of a year. And that's the case for Green Day with me. Before that, all the bands were older, and then very quickly after they start getting younger.
Yeah.
And I remember, and I was very much a punk rock kid, and
How old are you, Em?
I'm 51 years old, Stuart.
Right.
And I remember hearing Dookie and thinking, oh, I like this. I recognize it as being an authentic punk rock album. I was never part of the constituency that said, oh, that ain't punk. I was never buying that. I could see its roots. I could see its authenticity. So that was never a question. I just didn't love it particularly. I liked it. But when I heard Insomniac, and particularly when I heard Panic Song, I realized, and I remember realizing, oh, right, this is a band that I'm going to love now. So it's quite special to me. But it is musically, just very quickly, I spoke to the albums, not in preparation for this, in the past. I spoke to Rob Cavallo, who produced the album, and I spoke to Trey Cool, who's the band's drummer, just simply about the kind of athleticism and musicality required to play something like that. And if the listeners haven't heard it, I'd recommend they do, because apparently it was grueling. It was like, running sprints in spring training. It was exhausting and exacting to get that done.
It was an interesting album. I mean, I was a fan of it, and for me, I'm 49.
Right.
I'll be 50 in April. I think I was already DJing in a rock club by then, and the impact that Dookie had was huge. And what's weird is, like, I'm still at that club, 32 years later.
Wow, good.
And I can still play Basket Case,
yeah,
or When I Come Around, and it will still get pretty much the same response as what 18-year-old kids were doing in the early 90s. And I think Dookie's, and I'll put it alongside Nevermind, insofar as I think they're both incredible pop records.
Yeah.
Like, there's every track on them records is so infectious, like so melodic, huge choruses, instant sing-alongs, like hook-ridden throughout both them records. And I think the follow-up album, I think, as you saw with so many bands at that time, you saw it with Pearl Jam, with 10, to then go, right, hang on a minute, we're stepping back from this.
Yeah.
The furore of this is too much for us. We're not going to give you another 10. And I think obviously we saw it with Nirvana, and I think we saw it with Green Day. And I think, I'd say maybe they were the three biggest alternative rock bands at that point.
Yeah.
Like,
and sorry, Stu, I also think what was great, listening to you talking to Kylie, was that there was that wonderful window that opened with Nirvana and bands that came before. I'm not suggesting they arrived out of a clear blue sky. Jane's Addiction, Faith No More, Metallica put in some work as well, getting rid of the kind of cock rock, pop rock rubbish.
Absolutely.
And I'm definitely with you on that. On evaluating that scene. It's not to my taste at all.
No.
But instead of because Dookie was released just months before Kurt Cobain died by suicide, and instead of kind of American music, the American music scene going, okay, well, you've had your fun, it's all got a bit dark, so it's going to be rubbish and sanitized again. You had a whole different wave of more really good bands. You had Green Day, and you had the punk rock kind of groups, and Rage Against the Machine came along. And then Merkel started doing interesting things. I think back on the 90s, and I don't romanticize them. I don't think, but I think there is evidence to suggest it really was an incredible period for guitar music, where bands that kind of were perhaps in the 80s would have been on the fringes, popular, no less, in the way that REM were popular in the 80s. And the Smiths were popular in the 80s, but sort of compartmentalized in their box, not of the mainstream.
Yeah.
And suddenly this stuff was mainstream. And I think that's great. I'm not sure it quite gets overall as a decade, I'm not quite sure it gets the credit or the attention that it deserves. It was a really solid decade.
I could literally talk about it forever. And you mentioned REM there, who were one of my favorite bands, and they were pushed over there in the kind of alternative college rock, throughout the 80s, and then look at essentially become at one point probably the biggest band in the world in the 90s. I think around the time of Automatic for the People, they're up there with U2. They were huge, and I think and I do think, as much as Nirvana and them bands would probably reference REM and the Pixies, I think it was because of bands like what was happening in the early 90s with Nirvana and the alternative rock movement that REM got that extra push and got got credited and got the the bigger exposure, and taking nothing away from the fact that they're an incredible band, but and I think even at that point, and there's this I've spoken about it in quite a few other episodes, and I'd be interested to get your take on it, because music history, I would say, and I don't mean this in an elitist way, your casual music fan will be the big moments were like, right, Manchester 89, and then it was like Seattle grunge, whatever you want to call it, that alternative rock movement, and then nothing happened till Britpop, and it was like, well, no, that's not true.
No,
and it's that pocket in the UK is the bit that I'm intrigued by. The fact that all of them bands that you look at, like Blur and Oasis, from the Britpop time, none of them had the commercial success in America that bands like Jesus Jones and EMF did.
Yeah.
And bands like Carter and the Wonder Stuff and all of them bands, I really do think that Miles Hunt is an incredible songwriter, an incredible pop songwriter. And that pocket of music, we called it Grebo down here, just gets forgotten about. And I don't know, it's because of the fashion everybody was wearing then. It was lots of shorts and dreads and colours and I don't know what, but it just seems to go, from my opinion anyway, it seems to just, like I say, go, Manchester, Seattle, Britpop, and it's like, there was so much incredible UK, alternative. Suede come out, in that.
Yeah, Suede was what I was going to say, because I remember when I first started as a music journalist, which was 92, but 93 was probably the year, because 92 was a bit sticky, because I started on a magazine that was going broke. So
what mag was that, Ian?
It was well for the 90s, Stu. My apprenticeship was on 3 magazines that all had metal in the title. which was weird because I am, although I do like a number of metal bands. This isn't musical snobbery, I hope, at least. It is just pure honesty. I'm just not a metalhead.
Yeah.
And where I wanted to get to was Kerrang. Now, some of your listeners might think, well, that is a metal mag, but it's not, and it's never has been. It covers those bands, don't get me wrong. But when I finally did get there in 2000, I'd do the White Stripes one week. I'd go on a tour with the White Stripes. So when I say go on tour, I'd do them a couple of nights on the tour. And then I'd do the Beastie Boys, and then I'd do the Hives, and then I'd do Slayer, and then I'd do Green Day. So it was anything that was loud. That was where I wanted to be. So I was so in answer to the question, your question, or my thoughts on it, I think in '93, I remember reading The NME in '93, a specific issue of The NME in '93, and honestly, we're doing this interview, Stu, days after the Queen died, and you open a newspaper and all it is stuff about the Queen. That's what The NME was like with Suede. It was, and even at the time, at 22 years old, I thought, well, this is ridiculous. And the music press, particularly the music papers, particularly The NME, but also the Melody Maker, Sounds had closed by then, I believe.
Yeah.
They held such enormous sway, and I don't believe, and I certainly don't remember them really giving, certainly EMF and Jesus Jones, really giving them any kind of credit. It was decided that this wasn't particularly worthy. And you're right, of course. Unbelievable. It was an enormous smash in the United States. Rifling through my memory banks now, I remember that Jesus Jones remixed a Bon Jovi song. It might have been "Keep the Faith,"
Right.
Which, you know what I mean.
I think Right Here, Right Now went to number 1 or 2 in America as well.
And you've really got to be going some to do that in this century, Stu. And I've searched quite hard for this. I don't mean to bring a chill upon the podcast, but there are 4 UK acts that have attained a gold record and beyond in the United States. British acts. So gold is 500,000 copies. There is the Arctic Monkeys. There is Muse. There is Bullet for My Valentine, and there is Lost Prophets, and they're the 4. It's extraordinarily difficult to break America.
Yeah.
And you're right. I was lucky enough to see Pulp at Radio City Music Hall about 2011 when they got back together the first time. And that's Radio City Music Hall, for anyone that doesn't know, is a beautiful venue in Manhattan. And I mean, they played there 2 nights. I couldn't believe that they were playing there, and it was weird because the audience was. I'm used to. I mean, speaking to you now, I've got a pair of Converse on, a pair of Vans trainers. I was going to wear a Ramones shirt. I'm wearing a Pill shirt, so at least I've got an English
Lovely
on my chest. But I'm used to going sort of, especially punk rock shows where everybody is dressed like they could easily be American. And at this show at Radio City Music Hall, everyone was dressed as if they really wanted to be English, as if they really wanted to be Jarvis Cocker.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like it. But that's retrospectively.
Yeah.
On His and Hers and on Different Class, they couldn't have drawn a crowd in the United States.
Yeah.
Maybe they could have filled a decent sized club in New York City.
Yeah.
But that's not the same as drawing a crowd in Cincinnati or Milwaukee.
Yeah.
It's not. You're right, totally.
Absolutely, and their loss.
Yeah. I went on a bit there. I do apologise.
That's all right. Tell me the first song you remember that had an emotional impact on you, please, Ian.
Well, I've lied a little bit on this because the first song I remember that had an emotional impact on me is Puff the Magic Dragon. But I find it so piercingly sad that I honestly don't think I can talk about it without it triggering me.
Right, so that's mine as well.
Right. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? It's unbearably heartbreaking, isn't it?
And Maxine Peake chose it and got very emotional talking about it.
And I feared that I would do the same. Well, she's a braver person than I am.
She's
Good for
lovely.
her. I remember Stu. I remember Stu way screaming, crying because it was so sad.
Yeah.
So I've picked, and my memory was sort of peaked by this. No pun intended to Maxine. By the writer Pete Pathidis or Pete Pathidis. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Who I'm buddies with on Facebook.
Oh, he's been on. He was good
Right.
fun.
Okay. Great. And he mentioned this song, and it is one of my early memories. So it is. I hate it when people do this. They talk for 10 minutes and you still don't know what the song is. It is the title track. It's from 1978 to the film Grease, and it's Grease, and it's sung by Frankie Valli. It's written. God, I ought to check this out. I'm sure it's written by Barry Gibb.
It is.
Of the Bee Gees. Also, trivia rats might be keen to learn. It also has Peter Frampton on guitar.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he does. And I remember my mum and I. So I spent my early years in Barnsley, in the People's Republic of South Yorkshire, and my mum and I went to see Grease in Sheffield. I don't know why we went to Sheffield because Barnsley had an Odeon. But we went to Sheffield, which is about 12 miles south, the nearest big city. I remember queuing. I don't remember seeing the film. I don't know if we got in, but we certainly queued. And of course, I remember the soundtrack songs because they were ubiquitous. But this is the one that I really liked. I guess we did see it because I remember that if memory's serving me correctly, the title, the song in the film, it's accompanied by animated images.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
right. So that sticks in my mind. But Pete, so I do remember that, and I remember that very clearly now that I think about it. But Pete made the point, and it would be dishonorable to pass it off as my own, but I can only concur that if you listen to the musicality of it, the session, the quality of the session players, the quality of the arrangements, the quality of the writing, the quality of Frankie's voice, obviously, it's really sort of music at its highest possible standard. It is not possible to better tune an engine.
Yeah.
Than is managed in that song. And I listened to it just today, and I have been listening to it, Stu. This decision I only made last night to choose Grease, and I have been listening to it a lot in the past couple of months. The way the kind of horn section starts a song, it's loud.
What an intro! What an intro!
Loud. I mean, I could have picked that as the intro.
Yeah.
And so whatever song I've been listening to sort of for the last couple of days, as I'm walking around the kitchen, I'll just be singing, but I won't sing the whole song. I'll just sing a line or two repeatedly to the point where it looks like I'm attempting to drive my wife insane and have her committed so I can live off her salary, which is far greater than mine. And she was saying, for God's sake, Ian, just shut up, will you? Please, I love you, but shut up. She didn't even say I love you. She just said, shut up. And yeah, it's just a banger as an 8-year-old, and no, 7. I was in 7, so it's a banger then, and it's a banger now, and I'm pleased that I've pulled that one out.
Wonderful. Tell me the song that reminds you of your time at school.
Song that reminds me of time at school. Now here, I hope I've done something original and trailblazing, Stu, in that it's not a song that I listened to at school.
Okay.
It's a song that someone else listened to at school.
This is a maverick move, and I'm loving it.
So by now, Stu, the spectre of divorce had descended on my young life, and myself and my mum had moved south to Buckingham for my teenage years. And listeners will be astonished to learn, given my clear, exalted intelligence and smooth verbosity, that in a county that had the 12 plus, I failed my 12 plus. If my mum is listening to this, she will want me to tell you that at the end of my first term at a secondary modern, I was offered the chance to move to the grammar school, which was right next door. Beat that for an inferiority complex. But being the stubborn little swine that I am, I said, no, I don't want to. You didn't want me in the first place, so you're not having me now. And she was apparently okay with that. Anyway, so I went to the secondary modern school, and when you get to about 14, of course, you start, or some of you start taking music seriously. And there were 3 scenes in my school, certainly my school year. There were some kids that liked psychobilly music. If anybody listens to the psychobilly music, and in order to prep for this, Stu, I thought it was garbage then, when I was 14 and my brain was a quarter formed, and I liked myself a load of old rubbish. I listened to some of these psychobilly bands last night. Oh man, they are bad. King Kurt is not a good band. I thought the King Kurt were the best of the bunch.
Meteors?
Oh, they're even worse. But I did go and see them. I went to see the Meteors in Deptford. What is a 15-year-old doing with his mate in Deptford?
You had no place there, mate.
At the Crick in Deptford. I'm deep in Millwall country. And I used to go to gigs at the Club Fuck to see them, which anybody remembers is at the he was at the Clarendon. They were vile. They were horrible shows. They were nasty, nasty people at those shows. It's weird, very quickly. I'd go to watch these, pretty psychotic sounding punk bands, Suicidal Tendencies, who at the time sounded different to how they would sound, the Circle Jerks. And, people would literally be diving off PA stacks. No violence in the crowd, which is, of course, as it should be. You go and see these lame psychobilly bands, but the audience are punching the crap out of each other. It was really hairy. Fortunately, I'm small and unthreatening, so I never got a piece of the action, nor did I want it. Anyway, so then there was me and my mate, and we would listen to punk and speed metal. And there was this other group who were about 3 people, and we kind of acknowledged each other's love of music, but we weren't an intermingled group of friends at all. One of them's name was Johnny Brewster, and I'm going to give him a shout out. And they were crazy about hip hop, nuts about it. And I just remember at the time thinking that was just fantastic, that people that I knew were so into what was easily the most exciting scene of the 3. I mean, it doesn't take much to be
100%.
And so the song that I've picked is I'm Bad by LL Cool J, because I remember my friend Johnny went down to what was then the Hammersmith Odeon to see LL Cool J and Public Enemy.
And Eric B.
And some of the audio from that show is on the album It Takes a Nation of Millions.
I was there.
Right, okay. Unfortunately, I believe it's Tim Westwood doing the shout out. So that's not his. And I was there the night before at a rubbish metal show that was very poorly attended. And they went down and they were so excited. And it was a schlep to get from Buckingham to London. I mean, my mum was great. I said to her, if I'd said to her, I mean, honestly, I'm going to go and see, oh God, I don't know, the Circle Jerks on a Thursday night. Can you drop me off at Milton Keynes Station? And she would, and then pick me up at midnight with school the next day.
That's a good mum, mate.
That's not actually correct, because the Circle Jerks was a Saturday, but definitely she did that, and did that numerous times. And anyway, so just to quickly, I remember just how excited they were going to the show. And my mate Johnny got to Hammersmith Stadium.
Oh, he didn't get mugged, did he?
He got mugged for his trainers. He got mugged for his running.
They were running through. There was gangs running through the trains, just nicking trainers, nicking wallets.
He got mugged for his Run DMC Adidas.
Oh,
I don't know why I'm laughing, poor Johnny. But I remember just thinking, and sort of the music that I was listening to Slayer had signed to Def Jam, so I was aware, and had been produced by Rick Rubin. So I was aware of this. It wasn't entirely a foreign country to me, and I was intrigued by it. But what really struck me, and what I really remember, is just how damn passionate they were about hip hop, and I just thought that was the greatest thing. So that's a shout out to my mate Johnny. LL Cool J, I'm Bad, which today, if anyone gives it a listen, which today sounds like it was recorded in about 1932, given how different it is from current and certainly 21st century hip hop.
No rapper can rap quite like I can.
I'll
take a muscle band man and put his face in the sand. Yeah, still remember it. Oh, I loved it. I loved it. Right. Tell me the first record you bought from a record store, mate.
Right. The first record I bought from a record store, Stu, and I bought 2 of them.
Good.
Or the wording's not quite clear on this. They were bought from a record store. I didn't buy them. They were bought.
Okay.
And it was Master Blaster by Stevie Wonder.
Wonderful.
I almost said by Stevie Winwood then. And Master Blaster was the first single that I ever owned. And what I should say was the first singles that I ever owned, because I got it home. Now, again, memory is malleable, but I remember it being a cold Saturday early evening. And I think it must have been in winter, because I remember it being dark. And I pulled it out of its sleeve.
Where'd you buy it?
Let me see now. Where would we have bought it? It was bought in Barnsley Town Centre, so my guess it would have been either W.H. Smith or Woolworths. We had a Woolworths at the time. Probably Woolworths. That had the biggest record department.
Yeah.
I remember buying some Jam stuff from Woolworths. It was a pretty decent record department. Yeah. And I sat down and I read the credits on the middle of the disc in front of the fire. And I looked up and it had warped like a fan, melted cheese. And I remember this as if it were yesterday. And I knew it was screwed. And I went to my mum and I said, "Mum, is it supposed to do this?" And she said, "No, love, it's not." And I just and I wasn't we have a word in Barnsley. I wasn't a maungy child. I wasn't given to histrionics, but I just pretty much had a nervous breakdown on the spot. It was a bad scene, and because again, younger listeners will I think we can't be expected to understand that I could only hear this song on the radio, and if the radio didn't decide to play it, I couldn't hear it. So I couldn't just, there was no means. People listening to this now might make a note and put it straight on. You couldn't do that. And my mum, bless her, and we lived about 2 miles outside of town at that time, and she got in the car, rushed down there, and bought me another copy before the shop closed.
Mate, you've got a special mum, I tell you.
She's a right enabler. And so I had it, and I just think I've never seen Stevie Wonder play. I wish I had. And it was sort of a bit off-brand because I liked again listening to the radio. I liked Elvis Costello, and I liked the Boomtown Rats, and I liked Turning Japanese by the Vapors. I like that kind of energetic, melodic pop rock sort of stuff. And Motorhead would soon be to enter my life and change my life completely. But there was just something superior about Master Blaster. Its rhythm, its groove, what I come to realize now are its arrangements. It was just a badass piece of music. It was just again, like Grease, it was just top tier stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty pleased because the first album I ever owned, Stu, was Barry Manilow's Greatest Hits. So I don't want you really.
Which one? Manilow Magic?
Yeah, the one with him on the front, kind of like in a white or silvery shirt.
Menlo Magic, mate. Menlo Magic.
So you really know your stuff. And I mean,
I don't know if that's a cool one to know or not.
No, and obviously Mandy is just a knock it out of the park monster ballad. But I'm pleased that Stevie Wonder was my first single. What was your? I know I'm taking up a lot of your time here, Stu, but what was your first?
No, we're in no rush, man. The first single that I owned was the first record I got bought was "Laughing Dome" by Bowie. My nan got me that, and I'm not saying that I was a Bowie fan. It was a novelty record, and she must have heard it and bought it from me when I was tiny. And I remember just listening and I think it was really funny. No idea who David Bowie was then.
Right.
And she bought me that and a song, I can't remember who it's by, it was called Jungle Rock. And it was probably got played in the, around a lot of the kind of psychedelic clubs as well. Yeah, that's it. And I got that. But the first record I bought with my own money was Buggles, Video Called the Radio Star.
Oh, that is such a fine song.
It's a cracker, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a masterpiece, no doubt about it. Even especially because Trevor Horn, it was a Trevor Horn song.
Yeah,
my guess is he produced it.
He did.
So it still sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I actually saw ABC at the weekend, funnily enough. And, I went to. It was my best friend's a musician comedian called Cunt and the Gang.
Oh right, okay,
yeah. So he's
the
guy that's had the Boris Johnson song and the recent Prince Andrew one that charted. Yeah, so that's my best bud, and we've been mates like, God blimey, we've worked out 42 years, and so we went to this 80s festival to celebrate his 50th, and we saw, who did we see? We saw Adam Ant. I've not seen Adam Ant on his comeback trail.
I've not seen him at all. I know what, I could have picked Adam and the Ants quite easily, but that slipped my mind. Sorry, Stu.
It was fantastic. He was amazing.
Right.
And he got supported by OMD, and it's the first time I've seen OMD, and I love OMD.
Right. Okay.
And they just come on and just literally just done a greatest hits, and it was phenomenal. And before that ABC, and there was all your Kershaws and your Howard Jones and stuff like that, and it was pop-tastic day out. It was lovely.
That sounds like, I've certainly had worse Saturdays or Sundays.
Oh man, I had the best time. Being the age I am, the early 80s and stuff like that, and most of them bands were on Now That's What I Call Music, the first one, and that was the first album I owned.
And, and so what, 20,000 people-ish sort of crowd?
No, I would say 8.
That's all right though. That's what you don't want is 80.
No, it was great, and I was probably the youngest one there. It was wonderful.
Fantastic. It's like when I go and see Elvis Costello. It's like something I wonder. That's the only reason I go. That I'm going for another 10 years.
Do you know what? No one's ever chosen an Elvis Costello song on this podcast, apart from 3 people have. Right. You haven't got one on your list, have you?
No, I haven't. No.
But 3 people have, and all 3 people chose "I Want You."
That doesn't surprise me. I'll tell you a quick story. I've seen Elvis at least 30 times, and I saw him once at the Shepherd's Bush Empire, and he opened the set with "I Want You." That was the first song he played. And I don't know if you like football, Stu, but for anyone that does, if you go and see a band play, no matter how brilliant the band are and how brilliant they may perform a song that you particularly love, you make a conscious decision to cheer and clap. But if you support a football team and your team scores a goal, you make a noise without knowing you're doing it. On the rare occasions that Barnsley score a goal, that's what happens. And so Elvis opened with "I Want You." He didn't do the acoustic intro bit. He just went, "I want you." And there was this noise that went, "Ah!" And I thought, what is that? And of course it was me making that noise. I was making
primal roar from nowhere.
An involuntary goal sound at a song. People were looking around at me. Ah! So that was quite a striking. That was quite a striking night. November '94. That was. He played.
Wonderful.
4 Fridays. 4 Fridays in November at Shepherd's Bush.
Oh, incredible! Tell me the song that soundtracked your year's clubbing.
Right, I've had no years clubbing, Stu. There's no getting away from it. I've
Rock
just
clubs can't, mate. Rock clubs can.
right.
I've always been a rock clubber.
Right. So there used to be so when so you were talking about London, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons perhaps you didn't feel the need to come to London is because you've always been within striking distance of the city. So it wasn't such a foreign concept to you. I don't know if that's true or fair. If you were from the People's Republic of South Yorkshire or Middlesbrough or Cornwall, perhaps it's a different thing. Less so now, perhaps, because we have the technology that we're using today. But certainly for me, it was always my destination. I had an uncle that lived in London who I came to see when I was 12. And he showed me around the city, and I just thought, well, this is clearly the greatest place I've ever been to. And it remains my favorite city. And I've been fortunate enough to go to many dozens of cities with what I laughingly refer to as my job. And it just so happened that wanting to become a music journalist, you were required certainly then to be in London, certainly to pick up, interviewing bands work, because they would be at the record company or at the venue. So I got here and I worked my way into the city slowly. I started off in Southgate, which is almost at the end of the Piccadilly line. And then I moved to Palmer's Green, which is a mile or two further in a 2-room bed set. And I got my first circle of friends. A couple of friends from Buckingham moved to the city. And I was a music journalist. I was pretty low down the pecking order, but nonetheless, I was a music journalist. And there was a club on Green Lanes, just the north side of the North Circular. And I've been racking my brains and I've remembered the name of it. It was called Fagin's. And it was just basically the back room of a pub, quite a large rectangular room. And my friends and I've heard illegal activity mentioned on the show before. So me and my friends would go down to a pub. I've named it in my book, but I'll not name it on the air in case you end up in court. The sketchiest pub you ever saw, which was down by Turnpike Lane, and we'd score a pretty enormous quantity of amphetamine sulfate, and then we would go to the club and we'd take speed, and I mean my long history of drug misuse, it is chronicled in the book, but this was the first time I was sort of becoming aware that I liked this stuff perhaps even more than my friends did, because I'd stay awake for days on end, literally like up to 5 days I'd be awake. I wouldn't recommend it. And we would sit at a table at the back. But as we were discussing earlier, Stu, it was a great time. This is sort of 93. It was a great time. They play Alice in Chains and they play Social Distortion and they play the Black Crowes. There was none of that kind of LA hair metal rubbish. It was great. It was a great. And we'd sit at the back listening to music, but talking. And 1 minute it'd be 11:10, and the next minute it would be 2:55. It closed at 3. It just used to fly by. And it'd be like, oh man, oh no. And we'd know it was the end because every single week they would play Ace of Spades by Motorhead as the final song. So how could that not be? And I do honestly believe that there is a scientific formula waiting to be discovered that will empirically prove that Ace of Spades is the one song beloved of every single person alive who has been lucky enough to hear it.
Yeah.
So that's what I remember. And it was great. I got a girlfriend, Jenny, and yeah, like I said, it was strange up there because it was sort of people that were from Enfield and Winchmore Hill, and for anyone that knows that area. And they didn't identify with London as we know it. I speak to you from Camden Town. They didn't identify with Soho. It was like a foreign country to them. They didn't often go further in than the North Circular. I guess because they were from that area.
Yeah.
But for me, it was my launch pad into the city, and I'm glad I did it that way, because I think if I'd have arrived and just plonked myself down in Camden Town where I am now, might have been a bit much for me. It might have been a bit overwhelming. But I got in at the shallow end, and that was my first, certainly my first year, 18 months, 2 years in the city. And I found its beat, and Fagin's on a Friday night was a big part of me doing that.
Love it. I've not heard of that. I mean, my club's in Essex.
What's your club called?
The Pink Toothbrush.
Nice.
And that's been an alternative club since the early 80s. When in the early 80s it was called Crocs, and that's where all the new romantic stuff was happening, and Mode would have.
Was that the one that had the crocodile in the tank?
Yeah.
Right. Danny Baker got in for a piece to camera.
You can watch that on YouTube. You can watch that. He brought the 6 o'clock show down, I think, and done a little thing, and Depeche Mode. He cuts to Depeche Mode playing actually as well. That feature. Yes, that's my place, and I've been there. Like,
is the croc still there?
No, the croc was in fact an alligator. There you go. And the alligator is in Colchester Zoo.
Good. I'm glad. I'm not sure it's reasonable in the 21st century to be considered
It was gone before I started there. I started there in 91. It was gone then. Okay. Well, look, we've spoken about various places that you've called home. So for track 6, let's take you home and tell me the favourite song from an artist from your home county, please.
Yeah, my home county is South Yorkshire. I've got to do it. It's the People's Republic of South Yorkshire, and I'm just shooing a cat away there. Cats love boxers, and I've got a box down here. When people say, people would say to you, "Oh, you're going home for Christmas." I am home. London is home. But my home county, it's possible to have 2 things going on at once. It's possible for me to be a South Yorkshireman and a Londoner. I have no problem with that. But London is where I live, and London is where I hope to die in the fullness of time. Boy, did I think long and hard about this. I considered nominating a Saxon track because they're actually from Barnsley. But I realised that Saxon are entirely and wholly rubbish, so I couldn't in good conscience do that.
That would have been a first outing for Saxon on this podcast.
But I figured so. I don't know if you've read many people from South Yorkshire on, and I thought, my favourite. So I almost picked "Cornerstone" by the Arctic Monkeys, which is a wonderful song, and I almost picked "Number One Party Anthem" by Arctic Monkeys, but I went for a Pulp song, who are of course from Sheffield, and I went for "The Last Day of the Miners' Strike," which is a bonus track on their Hits album. And the reason that I did so, there's a line in it that really annoys me, where Jarvis says, and there's singing about the 80s, singing there's some joker in a headband. There's some joker in a headband singing about getting chicks for free. He's obviously talking about Mark Knopfler, who and Money for Nothing. But Mark Knopfler was singing about workers in a television store in New York watching Motley Crue on a video, and that kind of sloppiness is not like Jarvis, and it's almost ruined the song for me.
Yeah.
But I am, Stu, from a town in South Yorkshire that was the birthplace of the miners' strike. And when I was 14, you're allowed to work when you were 14 for people of mine in your generation. Yeah, these young snowflakes today wouldn't work if it killed them. Hard work would kill them. So I used to have a job where I'd get up first thing in the morning before school, and I would organise the rounds of newspapers for the paper boys and girls at WH Smith's, which then gave me an hour until the manager arrived to open the shop, to look at these newspapers that were there waiting to be racked in the shop. And it taught me media literacy. It was the most priceless education I could ever have had. I mean, I'm a trained journalist. It taught me a lot more than journalism school did, let me tell you that. And I'd learned that what the Guardian or the Mirror were saying about the strike, as it is known in Barnes, it's not the miners' strike, it's the strike, was wildly different from what the Mail were telling me, and its aftermath when it ended in the summer of 1985. Also, I was going up there of a weekend after work on a Saturday morning to see my dad. And he still, although he was no longer a miner, my dad was a miner, my granddad was a miner all his working life, an uncle was a miner, another uncle was a miner, my other granddad worked intermittently down the mine. So it's very much my heritage. I've got, my hands are like a baby's arse, so I don't want to pretend that, but it is certainly, what I was raised among. And I'd get back and I'd hear, my dad would take me to the pub because my dad liked to drink, and I'd hear stories from the picket lines, and then the aftermath of the strike when they went back to work. And then I'd read this stuff in particularly the right-wing newspapers and just think, well, this just doesn't tally with what I've discovered, on my own beat. So I guess what I'm saying in a long-winded and convoluted way is that its title alone is magical to me. And I think that despite the line that I told you about that really bothers me, it's a great march through history, and it's a great march through history of the North, and to my mind, it being called the last day of the miners' strike, of South Yorkshire. And it doesn't make me feel homesick because I don't get homesick because London is home, but it certainly brings the old country to life for me, in a way that is both modern but also traditional. And I think it's a very, very special song in that regard. And if it didn't have that bloody line in it, it would be one of my all-time favorite songs, I think.
Do you think there's been a better pop star since Jarvis Cocker?
Since Jarvis Cocker? I mean, he's damn good at it, isn't he?
British?
British? No, when we say goodbye, one might immediately come to me and I'll demand a second appearance. I certainly can't think of one. In that, no, actually, and here's why I love him. I was fortunate enough to just briefly say hello to him at a Faber and Faber garden party. I don't know why they're letting us two Northerners in there, but Jarvis used to be an associate editor at Faber and Faber, and my book's published on Faber and Faber. And but one of the things that I said to him, so for anyone that there is annually a festival on the South Bank, which is the kind of cultural high arts centre of London, or one of them. And every year there's a festival called Meltdown. Great, and the South Bank, its venues are given over, including the Royal Festival Hall, are given over to a curator every year to fill with whichever artist he or she chooses. Elvis Costello has done it, Nick Cave has done it, PJ Harvey,
James Saville.
Yeah, lots of note, the great and the good. And one year they gave it over to Jarvis Cocker, and on his opening night of Meltdown, this would be 2008, he booked Motorhead into the Royal Festival Hall. Now, the Royal Festival Hall had been closed for 2 years at that point, so it could undergo a £98 million acoustic refit. And the sound engineers that designed that refit clearly had not factored in what Motorhead might sound like, because it was, for the first 20 minutes, it was just like white noise. It was like being inside the engine of a jumbo jet as it sped along the runway. It was unbearable. But the reason I mention it is because Jarvis came on and introduced Motorhead himself. and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome one of the greatest bands in the world, Motorhead?" And so what you've got there in Jarvis is someone who is literate and intelligent, associate editor at Faber and Faber, Alan Bennett kind of vibes, if you like, you know, an indie darling at times. But you've also got someone that kind of understands rock and roll, you know, and Motorhead to me always were a rock and roll band. They're always it wasn't the lineage wasn't Black Sabbath to Motorhead. The lineage was Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard,
100%.
right? And there's footage of them about to play the Sheffield City Hall as well, which is a beautiful venue, and they're listening to The Boys Are Back in Town. So you're covering a lot of bases there. He's never been too cool for school, but he's just super cool and incredibly talented. So after ruminating on that out loud for about 45 minutes there, Stu, the answer to your question is no, there has not.
Last track, and you can be tastemaker now. Tell me a song that you think many people may not know that you would like them to hear.
So I've gone for a brand new one, and it's so brand new that it's on an album that at the time of recording is not actually available yet, but it will be as we speak next week. So the 23rd of September. I don't know when this is going out, Stu. So
yeah.
The band are a band from Hastings called Kid Capiche, and they are a band. It's not like Kid Creole. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's not in any way, shape, or form like Kid Creole. And they make a noise. They're you know, there's a bit of grime in there, a bit of punk, a bit of Britpop. But one of the unusual tracks, one of the outlier tracks on it, is a song called "Party at Number 10." And I want to flag it up because I think it's a wonderful song. It's if you like the Arctic Monkeys, you might like this song in terms of how it sounds. But we're doing this interview, Stu, not to get overly political, but we're doing this interview, you know, days after the Queen died, and there is, you know, a murmur of complaint in the street that we're being required to mourn in a certain way and conform to kind of a national, a narrative of national grief. And I'm not. This doesn't keep me awake at night. I am a Republican, but they don't keep me awake at night. And I'm just, you know, old enough and wise enough to just sit it out. As long as Christ doesn't go until Christmas, I can sit this out to the funeral. But what I worry about with this is that a lot of things are going to be brushed under the carpet in terms of, I don't want to sound like a sixth former. Let me try and choose my words carefully. You know, what came immediately before will be deliberately overshadowed by the death of the Queen. And right, so Kid Capiche have written this song. And it's called Party at Number 10. So it doesn't really need much explanation, except to say that one of the lyrics, or repeatedly, it's repeated more than once, is there's a party at number 10. Don't get excited. You're not invited. And I just think it is a beautiful and important thing to quite adroitly and quite subtly place on the record that this happened.
Yeah.
And I think that there has been, at least to my eye, and maybe it might be me not examining things closely enough, perhaps not as much political music in the you know, manner of the original incarnation of punk, and then the Smiths. I know you love the Smiths. I know Morrissey is loving the Smiths is not the same as loving Morrissey in 2022.
It's an awful place that no one wants to be in as a Smiths fan.
He's really pushing that trust the artist thing.
One thing on this, then, you're wearing a Pill t-shirt.
Yeah.
I love Pill. Do you know that recent Peel documentary is one of my favourite ever music docs? I thought it was
it's
absolutely fucking amazing. My mate went to see Lydon do a sort of live show Q&A thing maybe a year ago, and he just said it was just wasn't very good. It just felt like it was a bit like Morrissey, where they go to LA or wherever and just feel a little bit, they're a bit more disconnected with the UK than maybe they think they are.
Yeah.
And it, you know, and yeah, it kills me that Morrissey's got these weird views. It's like, and yeah, and some of the things that I've heard Lydon say have made me just think, oh, I don't like, you know, these people are like proper musical heroes for me, and
do you
and
think
I don't know.
Do you think that Lydon means it? I find it very difficult to believe that.
But then he could say that with Morrissey. You just think, like, are they just fucking with people because that's what they've always done? And,
yeah.
But I think if anyone's going to be just on the wind up, it's more likely to be like Lydon than Morrissey. I think Morrissey's kind of shown his colours a little bit.
That's my inference as well. I'm not sure I'm willing to believe that John Lydon actually does think that Jacob Rees-Mogg should be the Prime Minister of our country. I find that. I think he has to try harder than that. Really, to be honest.
Yeah. Oh, what a band, Phil! What a band.
Yeah, I'll tell you a quick story. I saw them the other week in the summer. Up at the Forum, which is a mid-sized venue in Kentish Town, and with my mate James, proper old school British and American punk fan, my age, and we found ourselves a perch on the balcony, but we were surrounded by these faces, would be the term, geezers, not in any way threatening, not Larry, but definitely up for a night out, really definitely up for a night. And we were surrounded by them. And it transpired that they were mates of John's. They were called the Finsbury Park Massive. And John invited them down to every show. And they were misbehaving big style, you know, bottles of wine going back and forth, cigarettes going back and forth. Shall we call it contraband that you might be able to pile in a small heap on the corner of a credit card, being passed back and forth? And it was great. It was really lovely to see them. And then at the end of the night, one of them was sat crying in the bar. It had obviously all got a bit much for him. And one of his mates was assuring him that everything would be all right.
Come on, fella, let's get you home there.
A little bit. Yeah. It was great. And meanwhile, Pill were playing this weird, even by Pill standards, it was a weird set. Yeah. But I was sat around and thinking, oh my God, you were probably at the first Pill concert, Christmas Day in 1978 at the Rainbow up in Finsbury Park.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not, never mind on the stage, I'm just around me. There's you know, history and stories aplenty. Yeah.
Well, the Kid Capiche track and everything else that we've spoke about, we'll put on a Spotify playlist to accompany today's chat.
Fabulous.
If people want to find out more about your work, where can people get hold of stuff, and what can they get hold of, and where can they follow you?
Well, to be honest, Stu, not to be on the stump or to be a hustler, but the thing that I'm proudest of, I've had a book published in April called Bodies, Life and Death in Music. I don't know why I'm looking up at the bloody spine of it, like I don't know the title of my own book. Bodies, Life and Death in Music, and it's on Faber and Faber, and it's doing quite well. And it's about my own. If people have found my little diversionary stories interesting, they are in there. It's about grief as well, and it's about how the music industry drives people mad and sometimes kills people. It's quite difficult to explain. I've been lucky enough to appear on radio shows and podcasts and stuff, and I've not really got any better explaining it. But suffice it to say, the kind of tone that I've brought to our exchange here, which is serious 1 minute and then at least an attempt to be humorous the next, is kind of what the book is like. I write for the Telegraph. I am morally obliged to tell you now that the Telegraph's politics are not my own, but it is a great writing gig because I have enormous freedom to write whatever I please. So I'm in the Telegraph and I'm in the Times a bit as well. And so sometimes I'm in Kerrang, but Bodies is the thing that's built to last. I try hard on everything that I write, but Bodies is the thing that I really did drive myself to the brink of a breakdown trying to get right. So please read Bodies, because and please read any I'm not young, any emerging author, because I saw a thing this week that 90% of books sell fewer than 2,000 copies. I've been lucky enough to sell significantly more than 2,000 copies of Bodies. But most writers are broke, and a high proportion of books sell fewer than 12 copies. So buy a book, but please buy my book. I would be very honoured if you do, and let me know what you think. I always interact.
Wonderful. And if they want to interact with you, where's the best place? Where are you most active?
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, but I don't really know how to use it.
Right.
My wife put me on it. Apparently, it's a young thing. I'm certainly not on Toktik. And I am on Twitter at Ian Winwood 1. So like Stevie Winwood, but Ian at Ian Winwood 1.
Oh, well, we'll take you in it when this comes out, so people can go and follow if they're not already. Ian, I knew this was going to be a cracker, and it's been an absolutely delightful natter, mate. Thank you so much.
Oh, Stu, I've loved it. You're a master at this. I hope I was only worthy of the slot. I love it.
Absolutely, mate.
It's been such a laugh.
Oh, wonderful. I'm going to press stop. Don't go anywhere.
No worries.